Tired of dropping your phone or struggling to prop it up? Meet the PopSockets phone grip with expanding kickstand in black, your new must-have accessory. Don't miss out. Grab yours today. Click the link in the video description to shop now on Amazon.
This is the Chernobyl of biology. Sun documentary exposes Wuhan lab leak behind COVID and US's shock role in it. Few of us had heard of the Chinese city of Wuhan when the world was first paralyzed by COVID-19 5 years ago. Today, the sprawling metropolis is synonymous with the pandemic that claimed 227,000 lives in the UK, along with its sinister labs where top-secret biological experiments are carried out. Within the first few days of Britain's initial lockdown in March 2020, as millions were confined to their homes, questions were already being asked about whether Wuhan's of virology could be behind the outbreak. Now, as the country marks the 5-year anniversary of COVID-19, an exclusive documentary by The Sun reveals the experts, scientists and investigators who not only believe the virus was caused by a lab leak, but that America helped to cover up the scandal. Our documentary took me to the heart of the origins of COVID and explores whether China was trying to cover up the creation of a biological weapon by blaming the pandemic on a wet food market 17 miles away. We also reveal that, while scientists publicly insisted the disease came from natural sources, behind the scenes they were exchanging messages about a laboratory leak. One expert told us, Watergate was nothing compared to this. This is the Chernobyl of biology. Dr. Robert Redfield, the former head of the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, said that a few months before the pandemic, the Wuhan Institute was taken over by the Chinese military, while officials deleted its databases and took on a contract for a new ventilation system. We now know that 3 lab researchers fell ill in November 2019, a month before the first COVID cases were reported to the World Health Organization. "I think that's when the pandemic started," said Dr. Redfield, describing a frenzied cover-up that was keeping Chinese President Xi Jinping up at night. The U.S. virologist says he was aggressively silenced when he voiced fears COVID had leaked from the lab, where Batwoman, scientist Xi Jinping was carrying out experiments on strains of coronavirus. Dr. Redfield, 73, a former U.S. Army officer, also tells The Sun of the moment President Donald Trump begged China's president to be allowed to send a team into the country to help, only to be ignored. He said the fact COVID was ready-made for human transmission immediately rang alarm bells. Our documentary also probes links between a British-born businessman and American funding into bat virus research at the Wuhan Institute. Zoologist Peter Daszak, an expert in how diseases jump from animals to humans, ran a virus hunting group called the Eco Health Alliance, which was given millions of taxpayer dollars through the U.S. Department of Defense. In May 2018, the company, which claims it is dedicated to protecting wildlife and public health from the emergence of disease, put in a grant proposal for research that would have manipulated a virus strikingly similar to the one behind COVID-19. Dr. Redfield said, "They proposed to change this virus, and lo and behold, that is the virus that comes out." If you know much about grants and scientists, most of us don't apply for grants that we don't have data to know it's going to work. I'd say it's highly likely they'd already done the experiments before they even submitted for the grant. Watergate was nothing compared to this. This is the Chernobyl of biology. In January this year, EcoHealth Alliance and Daszak were banned from any federal funding for 5 years for using American money to carry out experiments in Wuhan. EcoHealth Alliance has categorically denied any claims of wrongdoing and said their research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology could not have started the pandemic. By Britain's second lockdown in November 2020, many dismissed the lab leak as a conspiracy theory, but in America and China, the idea was fast gaining pace. Even scientists who produced a paper, known as Proximal Origins, had their suspicions. Their hugely influential research rejected the idea of a lab accident, but behind closed doors one of the authors, Christian Anderson, said it was so friggin' likely. Email messages, obtained by investigative journalist Emily Kopp, show that another report author, Eddie Holmes, said COVID seemed to have been pre-adapted for human spread since the get-go. In China, where 180 million people were locked down, those who tried to get to the truth were threatened with their lives. Whistleblower Dr. Lai Mengyan, who worked for the WHO in Hong Kong, told me she fled the country in fear after investigating the virus sweeping Wuhan. By Imogen Braddock, assistant foreign editor. Finally, politicians have said what many scientists and journalists have been saying for years, that COVID did leak from a dodgy lab in Wuhan. But how has it taken 5 years to say what many people suspected within weeks of China, admitting there was a new virus on the loose? In a bombshell move, Congress accused governments and members of the scientific community of trying to cover up facts about the origins of the pandemic. And the report is an acknowledgement that the lab leak theory is not a conspiracy, after years of shaming anyone who dare question the consensus. It's a step in the right direction in the fight for justice for the millions of people who lost loved ones in the pandemic. Many will continue to question why finding the origins of the pandemic is important. It's important for the families of millions who died. It's also important if we want to stop the next pandemic. If COVID did leak from a lab, we must have more oversight over risky lab research. If it was a natural spillover event, we must take steps to try and prevent a similar disaster. The Congress report is a welcome victory, but it's taken far too long for a government to take the lead on the probe into the origins. Here, the UK government is rightly examining the response to the pandemic with the Covid-19 inquiry. But it should also pay more attention to where the virus came from if we want to stop another pandemic killing millions more. There's still much more evidence to be found, clues to be uncovered, and scientists to quiz. She said her boss told her to keep her probe secret. But when she was told by friends that China knew what COVID was and had the sequence to unlock the virus, she went public on YouTube. She explained, "I was told to do it, investigate secretly, and not to cross the red line, to keep quiet or I would disappear." Federal investigator David Asher, a former U.S. State Department official, said the probe into the origins of COVID was the biggest intelligence failure since Pearl Harbor. He compared the deadly outbreak to the Watergate scandal, which took down President Richard Nixon in the 1970s. "This is the Chernobyl of biology," he said, accusing U.S. scientists of helping orchestrate an outrageous cover-up and whitewashing the lab theory. David believes Chinese dictator Jinping engineered COVID to control the world order, spark chaos, and sow seeds of uncertainty. He points out that China had already stated at a world conference in 2011 that it was looking at creating biological weapons. He said, "At the time when I talked to people who were there, they were like, it was shocking. It was almost like China was dropping the death card, like apocalypse now. If you mess with us, this is what could happen to you." I don't think COVID was released as a weapon, or they would have released it, say, outside the Pentagon. But could it have been a laboratory accident involving programs they were running with reckless abandon? Absolutely. Could it have been a laboratory accident involving programs they were running with reckless abandon? Absolutely. David is calling for a 9/11-style commission to get to the bottom of the pandemic's cause, and claims the classified intelligence on its origins would make your head explode. As the world grappled with the virus in April 2020, when 33,000 had already died in the UK, President Trump stood at a podium and uttered the words, "lab leak." At the time, America's top doctor, Anthony Fauci, immediately shut down the theory, but 5 years on, so many questions remain unanswered. Today, Dr. Xi Jinping, the Chinese scientist at the heart of the debate, is planning ominous new bat experiments. Wuhan researchers have found a new bat coronavirus that can enter human cells, and it shares features with COVID-19. Jinping, whose team has collected more than 2,000 samples from bat colonies over 2 decades, now wants to tamper with it. In a paper published in Nature, she also boasted that her institute had built the first customized coronavirus receptors. These form the building blocks to change viruses to infect different species, says Redfield, who called the work potentially catastrophic. Xingli's research might read like gobbledygook to most of us, but if the life-changing pandemic really did come from the Wuhan lab, we must ask how long until humanity faces the same fate again.